So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth in our series of Working Lunch webinars, when we'll be discussing salary negotiations and onboarding preparation. So this is the fifth and the final webinar in our series of lunchtime webinars, where the aim is to take you through the process of making a decision to change jobs. So from that moment through to actually receiving an offer and negotiating a salary and onboarding preparation. Today we're dealing with that final subject, and I'd like to welcome our two guest speakers today, Fiona Jackson and Lisa Jones. Fiona, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure some of you have been listening into the other webinars, so maybe you've heard me talk before, and I've probably met some of you. But anyway, for those who don't know me, I'm, I say, one of the career consultants. My background is that I did do a short service commission in the army, but a long time ago. And since then, I've had a career both in the commercial world and in the not-for-profit sector. And my background is very much learning and development, talent management, succession planning, recruiting. So I hope that I will be able to be of use to you in this webinar.
Thanks, Fiona, and welcome to Lisa as well.
Hello, yes, my name is Lisa Jones, and I was also in the army. When I left, I went to work for a couple of investment banks in the city, where during my time there, I wasn't specifically in HR, but I did do a lot of recruitment into my own teams and sifted through a lot of CVs for that purpose. Also, first-hand experience, of course, of salary negotiation and so on. So both from both sides. So hopefully we'll be able to share our nuggets with you today.
And looking forward to Lisa. Lisa, Fiona, thank you very much indeed. So today's session, we're going to cover those 6 particular points: negotiating your salary package, what you should know when accepting an offer, preparing for your first day, how to handle the first day, how to make an impact, and then the first 100 days in your new role. So without further ado, can we go to the first slide, negotiating your package? Lisa, can I invite you to talk about negotiating your package?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think, this is a question that a lot of people ask, and, especially if you've had a long career in the armed forces, this is something you will never have had to do before. But the first piece of advice really, as the first bullet point there says, is to find out the pay range for the role. And it's worth noting that some pay ranges can be up to £20,000. So, for example, a pay range could be between £50,000 and £70,000. So, whatever you are negotiating does need to be in that range. Also, bear in mind that, as I say in the second point here, within a range, it is quite easy to get a pay rise dependent on your performance. So say if we have this example of the 50 to 70 bracket, if you're offered 55 and you're a bit disappointed by that and you've been hoping for 60, you perhaps try and negotiate that, but they're not budging, be aware that perhaps they consider you to be a slight risk. They're not really sure what your military background, how well it will translate. And so in a way, if they can see you in action and be really impressed by you, they will have scope to move you up in that band if that's an appropriate thing. Whereas obviously getting promoted, so if you are at the top of the pay band, say 70 or 68 or something, in order to get more money, you'll have to actually be promoted. And, some organisations offer year-on-year promotion, others do not. And so it may be that you have to do 2 years in a role in order to then be promoted. So be aware that while you might have got that higher pay band, a higher end of the pay band, you probably won't move on that for a while. So I think all of these things are worth considering. And when we say find out the pay range for the role, if you can't find this out, just through looking online, then just do some networking and try and ask people. Anyone who is already working within the organisation should be able to give you an idea of that kind of thing. And also I've heard of situations where people have been offered perhaps a couple of roles within the same organisation at different levels. And so one person that I do know who had that experience with one of the big four, they were offered one role at one level and one role at another level, and they really didn't know how to choose there. And the way that they eventually did that was by networking, by talking to people, by understanding what would be expected of them at both of these levels. And eventually this person decided that they would feel more comfortable going in at the slightly lower level, just so that they could then really make an impact, as opposed to going in at the higher level and feeling that they had to deliver from day one in an environment that they weren't comfortable or familiar with. And that's what I mean there by the third bullet point. The higher level you enter at, the more you will be expected to deliver from day one. And I don't mean that you should be scared of delivering. You know, most military people are very good at that, but just being aware that if it's a new industry, something you're unfamiliar with, the learning curve might be quite steep, and it might be actually more comfortable for you to go in at a level where you have more capacity to learn, rather than at a level where a lot is expected of you. We go on to include some things there about what does the package include, and you know, the HR department should be quite clear on that. There might be a bonus scheme. There might be various benefits such as private health insurance, car allowance, etc. And you may be able to choose. Equally, the way that the organisation offers that might differ. In the two banks that I worked in one you were given your package, and in the other you were given a percentage of your salary that you then decided how much of that essentially pot of cash you put towards which benefit, depending on what was relevant for you. Another thing which a lot of military people are concerned about is the pension. Obviously they're used to this this pension, this employer contribution pension from the military, but be aware that obviously it might be a slightly different story in the commercial sector. But many employers may match your contribution or offer a salary sacrifice. So it's worth trying to find out about that. And as I said earlier, you, of course, may be able to decide how much of your benefits pot you put towards your salary, your pension, sorry. I think that's all I've got to say on that. I don't know, Fiona, if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, I just have picking up on the pension. You know, different organisations may match your contribution or contribute more or less than you do, and you've got to look at that. But it is so rare now to find a final salary non-contributing, apart from still possibly in the public sector, and so just be aware of that. The other thing I was going to mention is holiday entitlement. And now maybe in the forces you just take holiday for granted, because you do get quite well rewarded in terms of holiday. And I mean, the statutory legal requirement for an organisation to give you as holiday is 21 days over and above the bank holiday allowance, which is 8 days. Now, some organisations offer more than that, and some organisations offer extra pay once you've been there a while. So, for example, I worked for John Lewis for quite some time, and I think by the time I left John Lewis, I was getting about 32 days holiday a year, because I'd been there some time. And in some cases, you can buy back your holiday. So holiday is quite an important thing, but I think it's something you probably take a bit for granted within the forces.
Thanks, Fiona.
And certainly to add to that, you know, I have definitely bought additional holiday allowance in the past. It's definitely something that a lot of organisations will offer.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Fiona. So you receive an offer from a potential future employer. Fiona, what advice would you give somebody about accepting this offer?
Well, Lisa's already gone through what you might be offered. So, you know, at some stage you have to agree the salary and the package of benefits, and then that should go into your contract. But also check when this will be reviewed. So it may be that you're slightly disappointed with the salary that you're offered to start off with, but as Lisa says, if you know that there's a pay range of the salary, you know there's scope for improving on that. So you might want to find out, well, you should find out, when is that going to be reviewed? So, for example, will it be reviewed at the end of your probation period? Or will there be sort of set KPIs that you have to achieve before it's reviewed? But just find out when that happens. I mean, all organisations would review pay once a year, but that's not to say that your pay can't be reviewed within the year, depending on your performance and what has been agreed. And as I said, make sure you get it in writing in your contract. And as we've also both said, you know, the difference certainly in the commercial world is that your pay will be based on your performance. So the person who drives your pay is you within the pay range, and it will be around meeting targets, meeting KPIs, meeting objectives that have been agreed. So it is up to you to drive your performance, and you won't be in a situation where somebody says to you, oh, you know, you haven't been in that role for 8 years and therefore you can't be considered for promotion or considered getting a pay rise. It will be driven by you. Obviously, if you're in the public sector, you've got the pay scales and the pay bands, but there is still scope to improve what you went in on.
Yes, I know that somebody asked a question at the beginning about if, you know, when you're being interviewed, someone might say, you know, what are your salary expectations? So apologies, I did mean to cover that in the previous slide, but what I would just say about that is, again, it all depends on the range, and also, you know, I mean, you can't really necessarily just say, well, my current salary is X, so therefore I should be paid that. You know, you're paid that in the forces because of the job that you do and your level of knowledge and experience. So it's kind of looking at what you're bringing to the party in that particular role, how you feel you could tangibly add value with your experience and your skills, and then perhaps tempering that within the pay range, as discussed, you know, doing some research, doing some networking. And equally, you know, if you know that other people have gone into the same organization on, you know, certain salaries, then, you know, that's good ammunition to take with you and use that.
Lisa, can I just, oh, sorry.
Sorry, do carry on.
No, somebody has just asked a question. It really ties in what you were talking with about pensions, and so I thought we might just pick it up now. So the person, Ian, has said, I've heard it said that if you're in receipt of a military pension, you shouldn't consider it a part of your salary expectations. For example, say you want 60 but a job is offering 40, you can top up with your pension. You wouldn't discuss this with your prospective employer, of course. And what are your thoughts? Well, my thoughts are, and it goes back to what you're saying, is you're paid what the market thinks you're worth for the role, and therefore your salary, you should not include your pension. However, I always say to clients that the pension comes into the pot of money that comes into you and your household, but you should still be paid the market rate for the job outside of your pension.
Yes, and I think your pension is your personal thing. You've earned that pension through your career to date. It's not really relevant, I don't think, in a salary negotiation. So the only sector really I've heard people mentioning that in is the defence sector, who obviously are perhaps a bit more attuned to what military people get when they leave the forces. But it certainly shouldn't form part of I mean, it should form part of your own self-analysis, as in, what do we need as a household? What kind of salary do I need to try and earn? But it's certainly nothing to do with the employer.
Thank you, Lisa. So you've negotiated your salary, you've accepted the offer. What advice, Lisa, would you give somebody for preparing for their first day?
I mean, it's tricky, really. I mean, obviously, every first day will be slightly different, but you know, as we say here, it's perfectly normal to be quite nervous, and especially if it's your first job after the military and you've been in the military for quite a long time. But remember that civvies are just people, so we shouldn't be too scared of them. You know, really obvious stuff like checking timings, where you need to be. I mean, in the current environment, there's a lot of onboarding that takes place virtually, and you know, we've heard of a lot of people that we've been keeping up with, former officers who've been through the OA, who've, you know, still yet to set foot in their office environment, having been onboarded maybe a year or so ago. So, you know, hopefully that kind of thing is starting to change and we'll see people going into the office again. But, you know, things definitely are a bit strange at the moment. So, you know, things like dress codes, you know, you can get all this kind of information from doing a bit of networking, doing a bit of research, and finding out what the done thing is. It's normal for in your first week or so to really have a lot of induction, and that means just training, showing you how to use the IT systems, getting you set up with an email address, getting you access to all the different systems and so on. And so I think my point at the end here, you may find that you're a bit of a spare part on day one, but actually maybe even week one, you might find yourself hanging about quite a bit. And, you know, it probably depends on the organisation and how large it is. I'm sure in a smaller organisation, you might feel that less, but certainly in a big corporate environment, you know, you might find that people are busy. You should have a training program put together for your first week, but it won't be every minute of your day. So, you know, use this time, you know, just say, could I just sit with people throughout the day and just watch what they do and just soak it all up, really. And as I say, you'll soon be too busy to do much of this. So my advice would be to really try and do as much of that shadowing and soaking up as you can in your first week around the kind of admin, and where the kind of virtual environment permits, if that is applicable to your situation. But you know, I think it's a steep learning curve, but the more you can kind of try and absorb and be, you know, be on kind of receive rather than send at the beginning, hopefully the more benefit you'll get.
I agree with you, Lisa. I think it's always a good time that you can do some reading around the organisation and the role, like reading the company reports if you haven't done that and things like that. Because as you say, you'll soon be in the job and you just won't get time to do any of these things.
Thanks, Fiona. So you've prepared for your first day. You step in through the front door of your new office, either really or virtually. So Fiona, what advice would you give people on how to behave, how to conduct themselves in their new organisation?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because as Lisa says, you may be nervous, but you may be excited at the same time. And so how do you sort of maintain your composure on day one? You don't want to come across as a sort of overeager Labrador puppy, but you don't want to come across as sort of aloof and distant either. So I would just say, be friendly, be approachable, smile, but also be humble. You know, we've heard the horror stories of somebody going in and expecting that somebody else will make their cups of tea and coffee for them. Well, no, if that's not how it's done in the organisation, you make your own tea and coffee, although you'll probably be offered one on your first day. But, you know, just fit in with the norms of the organisation, and obviously people will want to be helpful, but they have their own jobs as well. And so really to go to the second point, which was I was saying beforehand, you know, do not try to be too hard or over eager. You'll get exhausted, and so will other people. Be like a sponge, I think, at the beginning. You know, absorb as much as you can to start off with, and learn about the organisation's structure, strategy. That maybe the organisation organisation is going through a total restructuring. Well, if so, try and learn as much about that as you can. But I would also say, you know, don't panic if you don't remember everybody's name from day one. Admit it, you know, just go around and say to somebody, oh, well, I did meet you at the beginning of the week, but I'm really sorry, I've forgotten your name. You know, what is your name? What is it you do? So don't be too hard on yourself and expect that you have to learn everything on day one. Lisa, I think you were going to look at this next one about how to, you know, behave from day one.
Yeah, no, I would also just say have a notebook, you know, and write all that stuff down and write people's names down, because once you've been there 2 weeks, it becomes slightly more embarrassing to have to ask people what their names are. I you know, try and behave as you want to be perceived from day one. I think, you know, you can't change first impressions, so behave if you can from day one as the person that you want people to see. And, you know, for example, if you have been taken in at a managerial level, but you don't yet have a team to manage, behave like a manager. And what you can perhaps do in your first week, if you haven't done this prior to your onboarding, and indeed you might do it at the interview stage, is to try and get your hands on a competency matrix for the levels in the organisation, and look at what it is that they expect from people at certain levels. So, you know, for example, if you're taken in at senior manager level, you know, look at the competency matrix for senior manager in that department, or in it, perhaps even, I mean, some organisations structure it differently from department to department. So look at the relevant competency matrix and just kind of look at what might be expected of you at that level, and then try and tailor your behaviour and your interest in what's going on accordingly. And I think, as I say here, you control how and what people will understand about you. Apart from the people that interviewed you, these people will never have met you before. So, you know, how you come across from day one will be how they perceive you from then on. So, you know, if you want to be taken seriously and be seen as a manager of the future, or that you want to perhaps be given a team to lead within the first 6 months or within the first year, then start behaving like the kind of person who would be a team leader. And you could even ask if you could go along to a team leader or a managerial meeting or something like that, if you are at the appropriate level, and just say, you know, I'm accustomed to leading teams, and, you know, I know that that's not the level that I'm at the moment, but I'm really interested in how this is done. If it's appropriate, would it be okay? And even if they say no, they'll have taken on board your request, and hopefully, you know, store that away as you know, evidence that you are, you know, you're committed, and that's the level that you want to be seen at.
Lisa, I also think with that one, if it's an organisation which hasn't traditionally employed ex-military people, and say you're the first one, then that's going to set the scene for how the people in the organisation perceive military personnel. And so, you know, if you make a bad impression, then it could be, well, we don't want to employ somebody from the military, because look at the last one, you know. So you're also sort of being an advocate and sort of, you know, waving the flag for other people who might come in after you. The next one makes me smile, because it's something that I always dread, but you can't get away from it, is, you know, be prepared for a lot of online compliance training, learning new systems. Now, maybe you've just done some recently, but it will be a legal requirement for you have to do it in the way that the company wants you to do it. So you just have to sort of grit your teeth and get on with it, or maybe you love doing it anyway, but that's fine. And depending on where you're onboarded, you might be expected to do that at home, but that's fine. Just get on and do it. And we mentioned people's names, but my main thing as well is, if in doubt, ask. Do not bluff. And certainly, you know, I've been on both ends, either being new to an organisation or dealing with new people who come into an organisation, and you can very quickly work out if somebody's bluffing, if they don't really know. You're best just to fess up and say, oh, I know you told me this last week, or I think somebody mentioned that, but I just can't remember, or I just don't really understand what that means. Could you explain it again? People will respect you much more for that than if you try and bluff your way through things.
Thanks, Fiona. Fiona and Lisa wanted to add in this slide because we think this is very important. So Lisa, how would you go about making an impact when you join the new organisation?
Yes, I think I think we've covered off on some of this already, but I think it's probably worth just repeating some of it, and especially perhaps, be collaborative and inclusive. I think one thing that a lot of military people find quite strange when they leave is the lack of hierarchy in other organizations. But I think that can be a very positive thing. It might mean that you've got a lot better access to senior people, and your opinion will be valued and listened to and sought after. So I think using that to your advantage and not being afraid to give your opinion, but of course tempering that with not kind of constantly chipping in with when I was in the Army / Navy / Air Force, this is how we used to do this. Obviously I'm sure people wouldn't do that, but I think it can be a very liberating thing to have to have such access to as I say, to the hierarchy, and to be listened to, but perhaps not to overstep the mark there. And we say here, show you understand the business challenges speaking their language. Now, obviously, that might be quite tricky if you have no prior commercial experience and so on, but perhaps just showing that you've done a bit of research and you are interested. I think that's the main thing, to really kind of, show that you've really done your research and you have read about certain things that the organisation has been doing, either from the internal intranet or from their an external blog, or from what you've read in the papers or on the news, etc. So it's just showing that you're not just kind of turning up to work and this is just another job that you just happen to be offered, but that you have a real genuine interest and passion for the organisation.
Lisa, just to add to that, certainly that was my experience, when I moved from being in the Army to John Lewis, which was a very collaborative organisation. It didn't really matter if you were the chairman or the newest partner into the business, your opinion was valued and sought after. And there certainly wasn't any, question of, you had to wait until the Admiral or the Air Commodore or the General spoke before you could speak. If you're in a meeting and you are asked your opinion, obviously don't take over the whole conversation, but give your opinion in a just in an assertive way, and because you will be listened to. They might not take up your idea, but you will be listened to. So you don't need to necessarily defer to that rank structure. I mean, obviously you'd be polite and considerate at all times, but it will be very different in a lot of organisations, definitely within meetings.
Thank you, Fiona.
But also do be aware that meetings probably won't start on time and everyone will be late, apart from the military people.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Fiona and Lisa to address this one. How to behave, how to manage yourself in the first 100 days. So Fiona, would you like to kick off with this?
So, I mean, that is quite a difficult one, because you are what you are in a way, and you can't change overnight. But I would say certainly from my own experience, I feel more comfortable if I sort of fit in with the general company culture, and you don't necessarily want to stand out like a sore thumb. So, you know, as we said before, if everybody else in the organization wears jeans, you will stand out if you turn up with a sort of three-piece pinstripe suit with your regimental cufflinks and things like that on. So still be yourself and be your own personality, but also try and fit in as much as you can. You still want to be heard, but you don't want to be sort of recognized or noticed necessarily for all the wrong reasons. And I just think, you know, listen and learn, definitely. And do not try to change everything at once. You know, you may have been given a job where actually your role is to change something, but I wouldn't go in from day one thinking, oh, my remit is I must change it, because also remember that you may really upset some people. So you may be going into an organization where, you know, Fred and Flossie, dare I say, have done the same role for 10 years and they've always done it in a certain way. And if you go in on day one and tell them they're doing it all wrong and they have to do it in a different way, that will probably put their backs up. You know, you want to gain their trust and get them on your side before maybe you go for all scale changes. And then Lisa, do you want to talk about the last one?
Yeah, and just to add to that one, and when you say take your time and be reflective, I think it really is a time to reflect. You know, your first 100 days, you know, what have you learnt, what have you achieved, but perhaps look back on, you know, on day one, or even why you applied for the job in the first place, and think to yourself, you know, why did I want this job? What perhaps did they promise me at interview that I would have an opportunity to do, and have I managed to achieve that? And if you haven't perhaps achieved certain areas that you wanted to achieve, what can you do about that? And how can the organisation, crucially, help you to achieve that? So, you know, there'll be all sorts of, you know, internal assistance available to you to help you grow and develop. And it's time to take advantage of that. I mean, a lot of big corporates will have access to things like coaching and so on, which, you know, if you feel that that's needed in order for you to do what you want to do within the organization and to grow in the way that you want to grow, you know, make sure that you arm yourself with the knowledge of what the, you know, the toolkits that are available to you to achieve that. And as I said, a lot of big corporate organizations will have fantastic resources available to you. But the final point about thinking about your experience and background and seeing how you can add value. And I think after that first 100 days, or, you know, towards the end of it, you will have had time to kind of sit back and absorb and, you know, watch and learn. And it is then perhaps time for you to start saying, you know, actually, I've seen the way that we do this, but, you know, in my experience, I have done this in the past and it worked really well. You know, could we give it a try? And I think people will listen to you more if they've seen you absorbing and taking things in. And, you know, as Fiona said, not trying to change everything at once, but being reflective and seeing what value you can add. And really, you'll probably be quite surprised at how relevant your military experience is and how much value you can really add.
I think just a final one on that, Lisa. I've always found, you know, if you are trying to change something, and you may have to or want to, that almost the people who protest most about what you're trying to do and change, get them on your side, you know, sort of say, okay, well, you know, you seem to be, you know, suggesting that this is not going to work or whatever, but, you know, if this is the end result, how are we going to make it work? And so, you know, collaborate with people, especially those who disagree with you.
So Fiona, Lisa, thank you very much indeed. Some fabulous advice there, and great anecdotes as well. So just to conclude today's webinar, please keep in touch with us. For jobs and career consultations, oarecruit.com, or you can contact us on client.admin for any questions that you might like to ask. Now, we are particularly keen that if you have not already registered with us, please do so. We are in touch with a number of employers, and we can only put you and the employer in touch with each other if we know you exist. So please think about registering with us. If you are already registered with us, please think about booking a career consultation with either Fiona or Lisa. And you can do this even before you've made a decision to end your current job or to transition out of the armed forces. So please think about doing that. So it only remains for me to thank you all for joining us today. So, and I hope you'll have a very enjoyable afternoon. And finally, my thanks to Lisa and Fiona. Lisa, Fiona, thank you very much indeed for your expert advice and wisdom today.
Thanks, and my pleasure.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.